Hey everyone, this is Chris.
And Lorenzo.
And welcome to our Best of Saturday series. Now that we have hundreds of episodes, we get a lot of listeners asking us where to start.
So we'll be selecting some of our most popular episodes to share each Saturday from our years of podcasting. We hope you enjoy it.
No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on today's episode, I want to talk about the difference between managing and leading. These are not semantic words here. They mean different things, though I think a lot of people use them interchangeably. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm guilty of it too, of using one word versus another when I really mean the other. But when you really get down to it, there are actual differences in the job of a manager versus the job of a leader, and they aren't semantics. I've been with companies where the positions change, and they change the position from department manager to department leader, and in some cases, those are semantic. They're trying to change the definition, or they're trying to change the title in the hopes that the actions follow, and that rarely works. But in other organizations I've been at, they really mean something. The role changes and the responsibilities of the role change. So, speaking, I know in your career, you've been in management positions and you've been in leadership positions. What do you think are the kind of the core differences between the two? And do you think it's important to make the distinction? Do you think they're both important to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I immediately think of the idea of people say like you manage your process and you lead people, and kind of that type of vernacular. I know we've briefly brushed over this a few times on the show before, but there's definitely a need for both. And I think that, you're right to say it's funny when it is something like let's change the name of a job, or, if a company has a restructure or a reorganization, or something, they change the titles of positions. And you're just like, well, no, that's exactly the same job. You just changed the name. Like what? That's right. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works.
If you build it, they will come, man. Change the name, and they'll start acting different, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we've changed the name of this job from project manager to really cool guy and leader.
Yes.
And it's like, wait a minute. but it absolutely, I believe there's a need for both. As somebody who has been in one industry for a very long time, and held kind of the roles of I was just talking to somebody about this the other day about, they asked me, my role as a leader of people and a leader of leaders, they were asking me how come I felt very comfortable in that role. And they noticed that the way in which I led, I was very accessible to anybody who wanted to talk about anything. However, I always allowed my leaders to be the ones who felt like they were in charge. Like it was never about if I'm there, things are different, or if I'm around, all of a sudden the hierarchy changes. And they said that they noticed that and they appreciated that. And they were asking me, like, was that something that I intentionally did? Was that something that I learned over time? And I told them, I said, I think it was a lot of my time being an assistant manager, or a manager over certain processes within the business, really helped me to understand the importance of having people who manage things and then having people who lead things, and how you have to respect that, and how you have to make sure that you're not doing one when you should be doing the other, and that when you are a leader of leaders, that you really allow your people to manage the things they're responsible and accountable to manage. So I know it's kind of a long answer to answer your question, but I absolutely see them as different, and I've witnessed the difference of why they both matter and why they're both necessary.
Yeah, I think there's been a trend in, and I don't think it's intentional, but I think it just kind of happens, that there's almost a hierarchy that has been inadvertently placed upon them. And somehow you leadership is better than management, and leadership is something you aspire to be. Management is something you're just kind of like put in place of. Managers aspire to be leaders, And I know some really great managers of things, of processes, of scorecards. They're not necessarily great leaders, but they manage process well. And that doesn't make them bad managers or bad employees. Maybe they have some work to do on their leadership skills. But I also know some really great leaders who are terrible at managing process, terrible at managing the minutia of the day to day. They're definitely more visionary than they are, execution style. And so I think there's an error in placing this hierarchy in there and trying to get your managers to be better leaders. You should try to get your managers to be better leaders, but your leaders also need to be good managers as well, hopefully. And so do you see that ever in your career? Like people who kind of just they feel like they're trying to strive to be great leaders and they're not focusing on where they actually are good, which is in management.
Absolutely. Well, I think you're spot on in talking about like that it's almost a bad word. And like, look, it makes me cringe a little bit as well when somebody's like, yeah, I talked to somebody from management, and you're like, ugh, like, man, like what a bad, what you call me? Like it's interesting that we do that, but you're absolutely right. I think of especially when it comes to when you're developing or training somebody, like I think those are similar types of ways to picture it, where managers and people who manage things are typically really good at the tactical, specific behaviors and processes that need to be done to really get good and efficient at something. And I immediately think of, like you mentioned, if somebody is good at, let's say, managing, a scorecard or managing kind of a P&L, like managing the profitability of something. What I hear when you say that is that somebody really and truly understands the actions and the levers that are necessary to make things better.
Yes.
And make things happen. So like I need somebody who can manage these things because they actually need to teach them to somebody who's never done them before, or they're not comfortable with it. And that's what I hear. When I hear leader, I immediately think of somebody who's very maybe inspirational, and they're very good at getting people to believe in a vision and feel empowered to do it. But at the end of the day, if I'm new to a role or a job or a responsibility, the kind of the last thing I'm looking for is inspiration. Like cool, thank you for inspiring me, but like, how the heck do I actually do it?
Right.
Like find me a manager, right? Find me somebody who can actually show me and teach me how to do these things from a tactical standpoint. And I think to your point, like it's not that leaders can't do that. It's just that it takes a certain ability to really break it down for somebody, be patient with them, role model it for them, and teach them how to do things. And for me, I think that's where the value of a good manager comes in, is that they're able to do that and teach the ways of things tactically.
Right. And hopefully if you're a great leader, you probably have, so to use the example of your P&L example, hopefully if you're a good leader, you know what your P&L looks like and you know how the basic functionality of it works. But maybe there are people who report to you that know those levers better and know where to move things around better than you do. And that's okay, because you've surrounded yourself with the people who are good at doing that. And to be quite honest, the people who are good at doing that, they typically like that thing. They typically like sitting there and poring over that Excel spreadsheet and going, okay, if we move this from here to here, we can get some good movement out of this line item on the P&L. We're short this for this quarter. You know what? We see some low hanging fruit here. We can do this. The people that I know that are really great leaders, that are really inspirational leaders, that stuff is just draining to them. They don't like sitting behind a desk and doing that for a long time. And so there's a part of there's an objectiveness to the management role. There's whether or not they manage something correctly is very easy to define. You look at the result and you say either yes they did or no they didn't. Leadership is a lot less quantifiable and is a lot more subjective. And so depending on where your comfort zone lies, you may find yourself gravitating more towards wanting to, be in the space of leading versus managing, or vice versa. But again, I think it's important that you know how to do both, at least at a basic level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I think that you've got to be comfortable in both, and it's not. And again, it's not a bad word.
Right.
I think that like we're all guilty of sharing the same meme that shows like, manager, and like, they're forcing people to go do work, and
Sure.
the leader is the one in front of everybody saying, "Come on, everybody, let's go." Like
Right.
it's good versus bad,
Right.
and it's
almost
not,
cliche though now.
It is, right, and it's not the case at all. Like it is absolutely, there is a absolute need for both elements of that, when it comes to being somebody who is, both inspirational and educational, and being somebody who is, both, kind of an element of a visionary, and somebody who is also, a good tactical, leader who understands how to role model and show somebody something. It's interesting that we have kind of made it a good and bad thing, and because every single mentor that I can think of that I've had in my life, I can immediately give you an example where they helped me understand the why. They believed in me. They built me up to know that I could do something. They helped me connect the dots, and at the same exact time, they pulled me and said, like, "And let me show you how to do this, or let me give you an example, or let me, let me show you, how this impacts that, and why this." Like, so it's like they did both. They absolutely, gave me elements of inspiration, while at the same time, gave me very specific details, and examples of how to actually go do the work.
Yeah, well, I think something you said closer to the beginning of this episode really kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of you manage process and you lead people. And so if you think back to that meme that shows the boss or the manager whipping people and saying, go do this, the slave driver boss versus the leader who's the first one over the hill and people want to follow them, there is kind of a hierarchy when it comes to people. Meaning if you're trying to manage people, you're kind of fighting a losing battle because people don't want to be managed. People want to be led. And so in that regard, there might be a hierarchy. There's just not a hierarchy in terms of what is important to the success of the business. Great management is every bit as important as great leadership in any business. And if you lack great management and you're full of great leaders, you might have an inspired team who doesn't know how to do anything. And
Right.
and if you have a lot of great managers and not a lot of great leadership, you'll have a very capable subject matter expert team with no connection to the mission or vision or purpose of the organization. So both are needed, but you're right. There is a hierarchy when it comes to the people process, because people don't want to be managed, and people nowadays, they know when they're being managed. And there's a natural pushback to that. If I feel like I'm being managed by a person, I feel patronized. I feel like I don't, like they don't look at me as a person. They look at me as another process. And that's demeaning and belittling as an employee who has a unique set of contributions to bring. And so if a person approaches you, if you were as a leader are approaching your people from that standpoint of trying to manage them, then that's the problem. You should be leading them, and you should be managing the processes and the assignments and the job descriptions that they're entrusted with.
Yeah, that's a great point too, and it makes me think like is there? It's almost like you need to be a good manager before you can be a good leader. And what I mean by that is that you've got to be able to really and truly understand how to, manage the things that you're responsible for. Whether that's like it's kind of, I think of like time management, and I think of like the ability to become efficient at the role and the job that you're responsible for before you can lead others to do it. Like I have a hard time thinking right now as you were talking about that, like, have I ever felt that somebody was a good leader first? And I don't think it's a chicken and the egg thing. I truly think that it's one of those things where you can have an internal, motivation, or you can have a natural tendency to have, skills or competence that makes people like feel that you're approachable and want to listen to you. But at the end of the day, how you earn their trust and respect is actually through being able to teach them something and be
Right.
confident in being able to manage something. So I don't know. That was something that I was just thinking about that I don't know if you feel the same way about it, but do you feel that you almost have to be a good manager first before you can be a leader? Or is it possible to be a leader before you're a manager?
I think you are half right, meaning I do think that in a given role, you probably need to be a good manager before you're a good leader, but it has nothing to do with the skill set. It has to do with the credibility. So you could be a great leader. You could be an inspirational leader. You could be a leader that people love to follow on day one. But by the time it gets to about day 30, if you aren't also able to answer questions, real tactical questions like how do I do this or what happens when this happens, if all you are is an inspirational leader, you're going to quickly lose credibility as the leader anyway. So even if you have the ear of the people because you know how to talk well and you know how to connect the mission or vision to the organization to what they're doing every day, that's absolutely needed. It's important. It's imperative to keep people engaged and involved. But they will also have day-to-day questions too. They will also have questions for you as their leader that aren't rooted in, hey, you know what, I'm just not feeling it today. Can you help me get inspired? It's more like, hey, I just dealt with a client who had this issue and I have no idea how to fix it. And the answer can't just be, well, let's look at the vision of the organization. It has to be, oh, no, this is the process we have in place. These are the tools we have in place. This is how you utilize those tools. And these are the people I know that really know these tools well. And if you don't know how to answer those questions, then you're going to be the person that knows how to inspire people, but that no one goes to. And so from that regard, yeah, I do believe that you have to do one before the other, simply because you have to have credibility that you're in this role for a reason.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was thinking, was that I've absolutely could give you examples where I feel that people, had a leadership background and went into a role where they knew absolutely nothing about the responsibilities of those that they were leading. They were not the subject matter expert, but they were able to walk in and inspire them somewhat with the fact that, like, they're here to support them, they're here to lead them, they're here to develop them. But you're right, and that's kind of what I was thinking, was that, but they at the same time they had to spend the time to understand what the people did to then be able to support them in a way that made sense for their responsibilities. So again, I think it does boil down to, like, you have to be able to do both. Because the ability to understand how to manage a process or how to help people become more efficient in what they do is just as important as being the positive, inspirational leader, because you're going to have, to your point, you have to add value in both places. You have to be able to provide them with direction and advice and insight on how to get better at their job, while at the same time, giving them a great vision of the future, where we're going, and how they can be a part of that as an inspirational leader.
Yeah, I completely agree. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 Minute Hack.
The 1 Minute Hack.
So for this episode's 1 Minute Hack, here's what I'd like for you to do. Get out your pen and paper, and I want you to take your page and divide it into 2 columns. On the left side, I want you to write at the very top of the page, leadership, and on the right side, I want you to write at the top of the page, management. On the left side, I want you to think about, over the last 2 to 3 weeks, write down where you feel you have done a good job at leading your people. And what I mean by leading your people is, think about things like vision and inspiration. How have you talked to people about where you are, where you want them to go? How are you planning for, the future? And how are you inspiring the team to understand the bigger picture? How are you challenging the status quo and asking people to do things differently? And really looking to innovate, and write down those things. On the other side, where you've got the word management, I want you to write down where you've had conversations around breaking down, vision into tactical elements and kind of road mapping the future. How are you reviewing, resources to make sure that you've got what you need to be able to execute on a day-to-day basis? How are you establishing or refining things like processes and standards, operating procedures, and things like that? And at the end of your writing down on these two sides of the paper here, the idea is that they are very close and they're even as far as the time that you're spending as a leader. Because as we've talked throughout this entire episode, the goal is to have a good amount of balance. Now, you may sway one way or the other based upon the leadership team that you have, and whether you've got new leaders on your team or tenured leaders, or you're new to a business or new to a team or new to an environment. That can happen as well. But the idea is that if you do this practice, every other month or so, that you find yourself being very balanced in your approach to making sure that you're both inspiring people through your leadership, but also helping manage the processes and the things that will help them get better at their job.
Yeah, that's a fantastic 1-minute hack. The people that I know that I go to because they're gurus and they know everything, they're much more likely to have me go to them if I know they're also going to be inspirational in their delivery, which means they're good leaders. And the leaders that I know that are the first people I go to, my initial reason for going to them is not because I want inspiration. It's because I have a problem that needs to be solved, and they're subject matter experts. So they go hand in hand. This is absolutely a great 1-minute hack, and it's important for every leader out there to be really good at both.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.